an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Of Darkness and Dawn, The Elder Empire Shadow, Book 2, Chapters 21 and 22. In these chapters, the consultants get fucking leveled. They get spanked. That shit goes badly. I didn't think I was going to see it that was rough. And then there's a whole new investiture in Shera's blade? What? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. What's up, George? So, it's the end of the book. I really didn't realize. It sort of registered when I broke out the little chart, because George very helpfully sent me a reader's breakdown of when to read each chapter. And somehow, even though the last one on the chart was last week, it still didn't connect that by this week I was finishing the book. And it felt kind of short. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't believe how much happened in these last two chapters. This is so packed. So, reminder, when we left off, Calder and a couple of other ships as well, which we wind up finding out a bunch of them are, they have champions on board, which is what Urziah was, which is to say very, very scary badasses. They have also been brought along for the ride. And Shera is sort of set aside for the beginning of this chapter. We are with Carrion. And as it's said here, Shera had been aimed and released like an arrow. She's over here dealing with Maxwell's kids. There's something about using that terminology that makes it sound like a charity. I think it's just leftovers from that Office episode of Scott's Tots. But yeah, Maxwell, it turns out, by the way, used to be a consultant, and Yala sent him out to do exactly what he was doing. So everything I had said last week, I felt like Yala was involved with the training of these kids becoming what they are, but I meant that she was somehow involved with their training after they were released from the Luminians. I had no inkling that she knew Maxwell. And I should have realized that, what Maxwell knew about how to train them to begin with was such insider knowledge that he had to have been a part of the consultants. But there was no sort of... I think another writer might have handled this a little bit differently, and they may have had a bit of gossip about how there's this guy who nobody ever saw again, and people assumed he was dead, but nobody knew for sure. And instead, his death is so factual that nobody ever considers that he's still out there doing anything, or that the guy who was responsible for this little gang of mercenary children had a relationship to the consultants. It was just fully taken care of. So there's no gossip about it, and there's no inkling in anyone's minds about it. And personally, I prefer that. I completely understand why some writers might choose to drop a little bit of a clue. And as a writer, and as somebody who's trying to become a writer, that is one of those things that's sort of irresistible sometimes, is the temptation to drop something in. But I really do like being surprised, and I don't mind a setup of the consultants being this, and the consultants, but also Yala being this competent at covering up what actually happened. How can they maintain this ironclad reputation they have if they can't even pull off one faked death, right? So for me, this completely works. And I am also, like, as much as Yala is involved and it's super not the way I expected, I should have realized that this would be how she'd handle it, because Yala is nothing if not interested in handing off her own dirty work to somebody else. So my image of her, like, somehow finding these children after they had been sent off to the Luminians and then the Luminians let them go, I was thinking that she somehow, like, undertook training herself or organized it or something. But the idea that she basically found somebody who happened to have the same mindset that she needed, and she was just like, go ahead and do your thing. If you fail, no skin off my back. And she literally says it to him, like, it's really not risking anything for me, but better not fuck up. So all of this is, when it comes down to it, it makes it so much more frustrating in a way that Shera doesn't kill Yala while she has the chance. And that is not to say that Yala, like, that killing her was the right call in the long term. I have a suspicion Yala has further information that we will need to unravel some other things. So I don't actually want her dead. But as far as, like, this personal feeling of satisfaction, I really do. She is responsible for so much of what Shera has gone through. And I just really, that whole scene, it was so tough because I was of both minds. But anyway, as usual, I'm getting ahead of myself. So as I said, the chapter begins with setting Shera aside, and we are with Carrion at this moment. She had been feeling pretty solid about their positioning. And then all of a sudden she sees this giant bird flapping towards them. It comes off of one of the ships. And she begins to flee, telling people to cover her. And this is like one of those moments where I'm desperately like, how much exactly does she know about who's coming for her based on this bird? Or is it simply the fact that they have this bird, and that means that warriors are able to get there a little bit faster than she anticipated, and so she thought that she was prepped because she believed she had more time? I'm going to assume that she kind of knows who this probably is, but it could be just the timeline being changed on her, you know? So she pulls out that glass box, and she uses the veil to cover the island itself instead of just being a barrier around the island. And I enjoy the detail about, even though she knew it was coming, she had to really brace her mind against believing that she's about to be, like, crushed, because the abruptness with which this, like, outside sort of barrier forces inward is really startling. And there are other consultants who don't know it's coming, and they kind of freak out for a minute. So she hears them talking, and it turns out that it's Geraldus and Bliss. I was so excited to see Bliss again, and she did not disappoint. This bitch is so scary. And it turns out she isn't even, like, a human completely. She's a result of some sort of experimentation, which we don't get any details on. But I had thought she had some sort of link to an elder, and that was what gave her her power, and that she was like a person who had bonded to something that was related to an elder. And what it seems like is that she has human aspects combined with elder aspects that were somehow fused before, like in vitro kind of vibe. She says that she was born after a fashion, or in a manner of speaking, something like that. And this has me asking a lot of questions, because, I mean, what in the world are they not able to do in this universe? They can just, considering what she is, considering what Maya is, it's just mind-boggling. So anyway, Bliss is... They're sort of arguing with one another. Let's see. Oh, dear. It certainly is hard to see. Eyes up, mouth shut. No. It's times like this when you have to state the obvious. It's like saying, take a lantern. It's dark out there when everyone already knows the sun is down. I'm quite sure now is one of those times. Which I think is kind of funny because she's saying that to Geraldus, who said eyes up, mouth shut, who I would argue is also saying something very obvious, like make less noise. But obviously Bliss disagrees with Geraldus' entire premise, so makes sense, I suppose. So she was risking Bastion's vessel by using the glass box as bait, but it was the only thing she had, which we do find out isn't exactly... I won't say it's like... It fails. It doesn't entirely fail as a tactic, but if it hadn't been for Shera's like really quick and sort of instinctive thinking, this would have been bad. So around her, hazy outlines marked trees, bushes, and consultants prepared to defend her. Together they waited for the guild heads to move forward. So this is when Joran Mazewalker shows up. And he's wearing those black glasses, and Carrion scrambles back into hiding. One of the nearby shadows held a sword and wasn't quite as stealthy as the others. So she goes over to him and hears Joran starting to speak as she makes her way over to Darius, who is... He sort of rises in her estimation because she startles him, and he doesn't make any noise in response. He doesn't like, in surprise. And he also doesn't just strike at her without thinking. He turns prepared, soundlessly. And she's just kind of like, oh, okay, maybe he knows what he's doing a little bit. Which I kind of enjoy whenever somebody impresses Carrion, because she just seems like somebody that'd be hard to... She's giving McGonagall to me a lot of the time. You know, somebody who's like not completely insensitive, but very professional to the point of feeling cold sometimes, and a very strict rule follower, although she isn't foolish enough to adhere to the rules always. She knows that there are going to be times when that needs to be bent a little bit, but she is restrictive about those moments and prefers to not bend the rules if possible, kind of vibe. So... After seconds of silence, General Teach strode into view. She carried her sheathed sword cradled in one arm, much like Joran carried his own. His was wrapped in bandages, but he had it tucked under his right arm like a knight with a lance. This worried me. As soon as it's mentioned that it's wrapped in bandages, and Joran is a regent, I'm like, okay, that weapon has to be really bad news then, right? And indeed it is. Eventually, they'll move for the box. She gestured to the glass box lying on the ground, and Darius nodded slightly. I hope Regent Joran can distract them, but while he does, I'll be heading for the box myself. I'd appreciate your help. And she says, I don't need you to distract them for long. I don't need you to live for long, was what she meant, but it sounded better this way. Indeed. So, this is the first time, I think, that we hear the mention of the spear of Tharlos. Because Tharlos is an elder, right? That's the one that is, like, responsible for change. But did we know that she had this spear? I can't remember how much we knew about this, because most of what we see of Bliss is from Calder's book. And I know that we were aware of her link with an elder of change, but I couldn't. The spear was not like ringing bells for me. Oh, okay. George says I believe we have heard this before. Okay, I just forgot. Then that's fine. And I love this moment where he says, like, basically, I can sense her. And Teach is like, well, she's not going to show just because you order it. And then Bliss is like, hi. I love her weird ass so much. She is so scary. And it's that childlike quality that makes her so scary. Because kids can be really unpredictable, you know? Like, because their minds work in ways that we as adults have lost. You know? I remember, when I really stop and think about it, I can remember the wild fancies as a kid that my brain would run off on. And the idea of combining that sort of like chaos with the weapons that she has at her disposal and the abilities she has, that is so terrifying. And that's not to say that she doesn't understand the repercussions of what she's doing. She, like a child, they are tiny little sociopaths. Because kids don't really get the concept of consequences and other people being real people for a little while. You know what I mean? So this is part of why I maintain, like now until forever, that there are a ton of movies out there about how brutal high school is. Nothing can compare to the brutality of middle school. Middle school is when kids are starting to realize that they need like peers in order for to have support in social situations, but they don't know how to do that in ways that aren't really like cruel at times. So I feel like that age range is really scary and rough. And it's mentioned later that while Carrion is watching Bliss, she's like, is she like 12? Like the way she moves and stuff. And the whole like energy here of her just being like, hey, and not following the rule. Not even rule, but like Geraldus is clearly trying to make a point. She's trying to establish control of the situation. And the fact that Bliss has no respect for that at all, it's just deeply frustrating to her. I wouldn't even say it surprises her because I'm sure it doesn't. But I think that working with Bliss, maybe she does like sense what it is Geraldus is trying to do sometimes. And so you can't tell whether she's going to continue with the attempt at control and drama this time, or maybe she's just not in the mood for it and she's going to do whatever the fuck she feels like. So this is when Carrion like is looking at her and thinking about how detecting what her age is so all over the place. She can't figure it out. And this is when Jorn says they're getting better and better at making your kind. Makes me regret all the years I missed. How long did it take them to grow you, little daughter? Bliss sniffed. That's rude. I was born, not grown. Thank you. In a manner of speaking. And I'm the culmination of 100 years of research and development. More than that, I would think, Jorn said, scrutinizing her. It was the alchemist, wasn't it? This new boy, Barius? I no longer recognize Nathaniel Barius as my father. Please do not mention him to me again. What? Have we heard that name? George is over here saying in Calder's first book it was mentioned a few times, her spear. Okay, cool. Thank you, George. I didn't mean to send you off doing research, but I do appreciate it. But yeah, Nathaniel Barius is out here fucking with some shit and creating these beings that wind up becoming guild heads. Like, wild. And Teach says, we're attempting to stop a civil war before it starts. We'd appreciate you standing aside. And Jordan's like, yeah, you're too late, buds. 5 years too late. But it doesn't have to devolve into open bloodshed. And Bliss says, I may not have seen the Elder War, but I know what I know, and we will last longer with someone on the throne. The great elders want to destroy the Empire, so I will keep it going. The implication here just being, if the elders want it destroyed, that's bad, and I will do the opposite. And he says, so if you think the elders are so set against us, why do you think we've lasted as long as we have? And she just sort of stops and thinks about it and doesn't respond. And Teach interrupts the moment by drawing her weapon. And this is sort of my question also. Because the elders were beginning to stir by the time the Emperor was taken out. And yet it doesn't really feel like they've made any more concrete moves yet. The exception being Nkothi, but even that didn't really feel like it was Nkothi making the move so much as somebody else like going out and fucking around and finding out. I don't know about, like, I'm not positive that that's true, but it's an interesting thing that Bliss doesn't have a ready answer for him. So anyway, Geraldus pulls her weapon. It causes that wave of terror that makes Carrion, like, her breathing speed up and her adrenaline rush. But then Joran pulls his blade to defend himself, and it's so much worse. Quote unquote, everything got so much worse. This blade wasn't black. It was rotten. Rust of corrosion darkened one edge, the green of infected flesh the other. Channels of darkness and purple miasma crawled over its surface like maggots on a corpse. Teach struck, so did Joran, and when the two swords met, a wave of darkness blasted out like smoke. Grass shriveled and blackened at Carrion's feet, and a nearby tree cracked as it snapped in half under its own weight. Black figures fell to the ground around her as consultants died. Yo. I cannot tell you how pissed I would be to die from a side effect of two other big badasses fighting. I really just want to hammer this home right now. That is not fair. That sucks. I hate it. It's just so... This is kind of similar, you know, being that this is Will White also. In Cradle, there are moments where the unveiling of a spirit is so strong that it will cause people who are like low gold and below to pass out. I don't know that we've ever seen anybody straight up die. We may have, but this is brutal. I mean, the consultants who are like professionals, there's been so much time and training invested in them, and they just get fucking wiped like nothing. Again, they're not, I don't even want to call them like collateral damage, because that feels more involved than they even were. Completely innocent bystanders is too strong, because they're not innocent, but they're not actively participating in any way. And this is purely an uncontrolled side effect of their weapons. And that is some horse shit. And I am so mad about it. This really got to me, and it like stuck in my head, and I felt a bit of a way that we never have a real moment of Carrion stopping and being like, well, this sucks. Honestly, she's too busy, and I get it. But I really do want there to be some acknowledgement paid to all of these people who died for fucking nothing. George says, I'm so interested as to why Joran makes these awful blades. Like, why a rotting blade? Why a fear one? He seems like such a chill and cool dude. Where does this come from? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he seems chill and cool, because he puts all of his like worst emotions into his weapons, and they just like leach out of him. He's like, you know what? I'm really angry today. I'm just going to make an anger blade, and that will chill me right the fuck out. I don't know if that's how that works, but I can go with that for a headcanon. Jan is here. Hi, Jan. Jan says, Nigerian proverb, when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. When they make love, it still suffers. Ugh. That sucks, Jan. Man, Nigerian's bleak, huh? But I mean, it's not wrong. Like, when I was in college, I took some course about like negotiations and peace and religion. I can't remember the title of the course, but I found out that 97% of the deaths in wars around the world are civilians. 97% are people who are straight up not soldiers, not really involved. And there was something about seeing that number just laid out that was so sobering. Because as Americans, we've been very lucky in recent years, at least like, the last century and a half. We haven't had any major war happening on our own soil. It's been us sending troops overseas. So war has felt like there's a distance to it. Not to say that there's no impact on us, but it certainly doesn't feel like civilians are in the kind of danger that soldiers are. And to know that that's really unusual, that's really rare, it just made me suddenly afraid. Just the concept of not having that sort of distance and protection, which I take for granted as being how war works, and having to stop and be like, no, it's not. It just happens to be how things work for us because we kind of live in an empire that is just toxic and horrible and just goes and does shit to other countries. And there's a lot to take apart. But back to this. So basically, it's a wave of death that just absolutely kills everything. There's like, at one point, Esther 6 is in the air looking at the island from above, and she sees the blighted spot where everything is dead. And somehow her being able to see that from the air really hammered home that it was real. There was a part of me that hoped that when they moved the fight somewhere else, that they would be like, they would take that effect with them, and that things would have been really badly hurt, but it would be something it could snap back from. And it's very clear that is not going to be the case. The consultants who died are dead. The grass and trees that died are dead. And that is just that. So she used all her strength to look up and saw an armored figure rising with its back to her, holding a shining sword in front of him. The dark wave split around him like a river around a stone. But the flow didn't stop. Darkness and death crashed out again and again, stealing life, felling more trees from a distance, each clash of blades grating on her ears like the death wail of a specter. The light of Darius's sword flickered, and he dropped to one knee. Just when the darkness closed in around Carrion again, stretching out a hand to claw at her throat, the sounds of battle abruptly faded, the pressure lifting. It was as though the fight had been carried somewhere else, which it seems like is exactly what happened. And it sounds like Darius saved her life, and it was about to be not enough. Like he was about to go down also. And they just happened to take off just in time to not kill the two of them, and it was a pure coincidence. And Darius is like, okay, so I was supposed to help you get to that box. How about you get up and let's do this, because I am a little bit fucked up right now. And she manages to grab it, but she's still got that feeling of that death clinging to her and feels it like inside her body. She had to step over 4 consultant bodies as she picked her way forward. Finally, she arrived at the box, though it sat only a few yards away. It seemed like a mile. She moved to pick it up. A swirl of the mist revealed Bliss standing over it. "This is a nice box. I like it, but I'm sorry, I have to take it." I cannot emphasize enough how much I love her. She's so strange. She's genuinely like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to have to do this. But I do. So if you could just make it easier for me, it would be appreciated. There's just something so matter of fact about her that I can't help but weirdly respect, because that's also kind of how I move. You know, I don't like big declarations of intent or anything. I don't need to speechify. Just be like, hey, I really need that. And I'll hurt you if I have to. I'd rather not have to. I'm sure you'd rather I didn't have to. It would be so cool if you could just be chill and give it to me. That'd be nice. I'd like it. She's just like that. I appreciate it. So Carrion tries to use her shear against her. And Bliss manages... She blocks it with her spear in a way that Carrion is like, there is no way she should have been able to block that. What the fuck? And she is off balance and flailing. She would have likely died in that moment, but a half dozen pops sounded in the woods, muffled by distance. Musket shots. Sand sprayed in Bliss's face, and she sputtered and spat, swiping at her mouth with the back of one hand. She had transformed bullets to sand in mid-flight. Or her spear had. And I love this because it's not even like... It doesn't feel like she chooses what they turn into. It feels like it's her spear doing it on her behalf, and she doesn't really have a choice, because I think she would not have chosen sand, because it seems inconvenient. It doesn't kill her, but it provides enough of a distraction on her that Carrion can grab the box and run away, to which Bliss yells, "That's not very considerate." And Darius says... The spear lets her change things. Anything we throw at her will be transformed. I once saw a man. He shook his head. Well, you were lucky you didn't get to stab her. If it weren't for this mist, she could kill us from here. We have to retreat. And this, bit about her changing things, it goes back and forth from being absolutely horrifying to just straight up funny. They continue to fire on her, and she's turning it into, flower petals and shit. At one point, though, Carrion thinks that she's gotten away, and then she sees Bliss standing over a lump that's, pinkish and squirming, and Carrion is certain that that had been a screaming man a second ago, which gives the impression that that man is still alive. And being tortured. It's, this is not just, I turned him into a puff of smoke and it dissipated and he does not exist anymore. It feels like, and to be honest, I say that because she turns a woman into basically mist later. And I'm saying that thinking that that means that woman does not exist. That may not be true. She may exist still and simply be missed now. And that's how her consciousness is sort of trapped, which is horrifying in its own way. But this sounds like it's actually painful from the way it's moving. And it's just wild that it can go from something that feels so innocuous to then really scary. And there doesn't really seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason as to why she chooses what she does to happen to whom she chooses. Why does this guy get turned into that and somebody else gets the mistreatment? It's like another dude gets turned into a desk lamp. What? And I would like to know, for my own information, if a reader were to touch that lamp, what do they get off of it? Are they going to get that this was a guy? Is that going to make sense to them? Or are they going to get a conversation because it's still kind of alive and there's a soul in there that is able to converse with somebody if they can understand, that never occurred to me until this moment. And I hate that idea. I really hope that's not what's going on. I really hope that they're essentially dead and that the lamp is just a fucking lamp that was made out of whatever molecules their bodies were made from, just rearranged, I don't know. So this, she chucks her spear towards Carrion, and Carrion uses her blades to block, and the blades basically melt. They're not hot, but they melt. And Carrion is fucking devastated, and she was not ready for how, sad she was going to be over the loss of these. They are weapons she's carried ever since she was a girl, and they mean something to her, and they're part of her identity. And to just see them absolutely destroyed in this way, that has to really hurt. So the spear that had come at her hits the ground, and Bliss uses her ability to like make a hand come up out of the soil and grab it. And Carrion grabs the box and turns and runs, and she hears Yala and the like a bunch of the other consultants heading in and starting to try and distract Bliss, basically. And this is when Shera comes in. The man staggered forward a step before he turned into a crimson desk lamp. "Tacky," the girl muttered, slapping a woman across the face with the flat of her spearhead. This one dissolved into a blue fog, which swirled around inside the gray fog before dissipating into the veil. Better. Oh, God. So, Shera realizes that the kids that she has just gotten, I'm saying kids, I don't even know, but I think most of them still are. They are looting all of the corpses they can find because they don't have weapons. They were just in a cell. And Bliss comes across Shera and is like, "Hey, never met you before. What's up? You smelled like Nikothi." And Shera says, "Yeah, I stabbed her with this a few times." And she goes, "Oh, I see. My name's Bliss, the head of the Blackwatch Guild." And Shera is like, "Oh, God," because she knows that name. And Bliss is basically considered somebody you do not want to be fighting with. It's a bad plan. Of course, Cyphrin is delighted, and it's just like, let me at her, let me at her. "I'm supposed to say I'm pleased to meet you because that is polite, but I'm not actually pleased because I don't want to fight a soulbound and these men with daggers. I'm afraid I might have to let Tharlos loose, and none of us wants that. Excuse me a moment." She reached out in front of her and hauled backward as though tugging on a thick rope. Stretching out from her feet, the ground turned to mud in a straight line. In only 3 or 4 seconds, there was a creek running straight between the guild head's feet, running backward toward her. The current strengthened until it was a torrent of water. The newborn river carried a struggling, shouting, mud-strewn carrion backwards straight to the waiting spear of Tharlos. She was carrying the glass box. And again, it just seems extremely unfair. I mean, for fuck's sake. So, Shera jumps forward trying to, get Bliss off of Carrion. Bliss spun, slapping the flat of her blade away with the spear. "Stay quiet until I'm finished, Shera of the Consultants. This is very important." Behind her, Yala hurled a spade. The tiny blade actually made contact with the guild head, stabbing into her back and causing Bliss to stagger forward a step or two. She hissed, turning on Yala, the spear of Tharlos in both hands. Yala had attacked not only because the woman's attention was diverted, but also because her attack could give Shera an opportunity. They had Bliss between 2 pincers, and now would be the perfect time for Shera to attack. Cyphrin howled for it. Shera sheathed her weapon. I cannot with this bitch. Look. This is the wrong time. Absolutely. And she knows that. She knows that in her heart of hearts is like, this isn't the fucking time. However, she has real grief and doesn't know what to do with it because she doesn't experience emotion the same way that a regular person would. And she's feeling petty. Let he who has never been petty cast the first stone. I will tell you what, kids. It's hard for me to even be mad at her for this. I really want to be mad at her. I feel like if it were a different character, I would be in a way that I just can't be because Shera isn't really petty ever. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not how she really rolls. So to see her be petty, and petty is like a bit of a diminutive word to be using here because we are genuinely talking about life and death situations, but it feels like the right word because she is aware this isn't actually going to help. So that's what I mean by petty, is that it's really immaterial and sort of meant for like her own personal satisfaction in the short term, but not really to help anything long term, be it her or the consultants as a whole or anything. I just enjoy seeing characters act out of character once you get to know them well enough that it doesn't feel like the author just cheating. You know what I mean? So getting to see her sort of be like, I know that I'm supposed to fight this fight, but low-key, fuck this bitch. Sure, let her die. And she's thinking to herself that Lucan would not want her to personally be the one to kill Carrion. So she's like, I won't kill her myself because I know he wouldn't like it, so I won't. That does not mean that I have to help her stay alive. Those are very different things. And she's watching, and it says, Shera folded her arms and watched. Yala lasted longer than she expected. When she says that, I really thought I was about to read how Yala dies. I thought for sure Yala lasted longer than she expected meant by the end of this paragraph, she's going to be dead. But not so. An armored hand rested on her shoulder. You have to save her. I think you'll find that I don't. Shera, please, leaving her to die is the same as killing her. That's right. Look at me. Her life means nothing to you. I get it. Maybe your life means nothing to you, but it means something to someone. She's worth something. A vision of Maya, Yala's daughter, flitted through Shera's mind for an instant. I'm afraid I don't see it that way. Then it's important that you listen to people who do. You don't feel it, Lucan had once told her, and that's okay. You just have to trust us. Shera took a deep breath and gripped her shears. I love it. I really love it. I love him. He doesn't get judgy. He doesn't say, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's like he kind of knows what's wrong with her and is just, well, that's how she is. And what's the point of trying to make somebody actually change their personality? Like, I can't do that. I'm going to have to work within the guidelines here of who she is. And that's very practical, and there's a compassion to that I really appreciate. It's a sort of thing where it's the difference between talking to somebody who's neurodivergent and trying to get them to just act like they're, quote, normal, unquote, and somebody talking to somebody who is neurodivergent and explaining coping mechanisms for how to deal with everyday life in a way that works for them. They can feel like they're both just giving advice on how to be, but the second one is about like taking what you know about a society that doesn't work the way that your mind tends to work and figuring out the best ways to like work within that and still have respect for who you are and what you're like versus forcing something and pretending to be like somebody else. And in a way, constantly by doing that, you're telling yourself that you're not right and that you need to be different in order to succeed. And that will get to you after a while and just make you go, well, I guess I'm just wrong. And I really appreciate this method of like, hey, look, I get that you don't see it, but I think that you know that isn't really normal for like the way that emotions work. And you are aware of that. And if you are aware of that, can you respect that I may have judgment that is more clear on this point than you? And I don't know, there's just something about this that feels really like it's just respectful of her in a way. And it's so much like Lucan, you know, it really is. So I really appreciate this, and it's just truly all we can do. Everybody out there who is neurodivergent, I raise my hand. We have to figure it out, and you can try and make yourself fit into the role that you think you should, or you can step back and recognize, oh, I don't fit that. What does that mean? And that can take a while to like unravel, especially if you don't have the language for it at first, because I didn't, and many of us didn't. It's only really in the last like 5 or 10 years, with the internet being as full of information about this sort of thing as it is, that people are discovering aspects of their personalities that they were like, oh, I always thought I was just a lazy asshole. And it turns out, no, I'm not. I just don't handle things the same way that other people do. It can be really revealing, but it also is work, you know, and other people around you, it really helps if they know what's up with you and they can meet you halfway and not just demand that you do a thing, you know? So yeah, this like hits her, you know, she really hears him, and she whistles up Maxwell's kids. And it says, instead of acknowledging her, the Maxwell trainees just did their jobs, which I really love. They don't even have to, like, they're following orders immediately. So Shera runs in, and Bliss blocks Cyphern with her staff. And Shera gets a little bit of Bliss's power. The staff chips a little bit. And of course, Cyphern is like, ooh, that tastes good. I would like some more, please. So they begin to fight in earnest here because Shera has a little bit more clarity. Whenever she is able to like siphon power off people, she really begins to like level up temporarily. And as this is all happening, Maxwell's kids are like chucking stuff at her and coming out and like haranguing her and then falling back into the trees and stuff. So Bliss is starting to get a little bit worn down. And she tucks the weapon away, Bliss does, and takes out a pair of iron spikes. And I was like, oh God, because as soon as she puts away her weapon, I'm like, this can't be good. And she has the spike that Shera is so certain, it's just an iron spike, whatever. I'll be able to, you know, go up against this no problem. Because she's sort of overwhelmed by Cyphern. She's not really thinking clearly. I think if it weren't for Cyphern pushing her the way it is, that she would have realized this wasn't going to go well for her. But she isn't really clear-headed right now. And Shera hits out at her. She blocks with this spike, and it sinks into the blade like they're both made of clay and they're just like squishing together. And then all of a sudden, Cyphern's light dims, the hands on the inside disappear, and Shera can feel this scream. Something was being torn away inside, as though someone dug at her spine with a dull blade. I am assuming that is the death of the soul binding that she has had. This is a binding of something deep in her to this weapon that is being killed, which is brutal. And it really fucks her up. Like, she is barely able to move around later on. And it's... I really felt for her in this moment because she had no idea this was even possible. It's really clear she doesn't even quite get what happened for a moment. But also, Cyphern was such bad news that I can't help but be a little relieved, because I just didn't see Shera's personality and Cyphern as a weapon being a combo that went anywhere good. I wanted her to somehow beat the voice. And from what people say, there is a point at which a soulbound like manages to have control again. But it would always be there to a point. And I don't know, Shera has such a difficulty with compassion in the first place. It just felt like really, really, you know. So Bliss uses the second spike and sinks it into Bastion's veil's box. And she turns and skips into the woods after she does this. It's beginning to like... The mist is thinning and beginning to vanish. And Shera is laying there with her weapon, looking at this going, oh my God, we lost. And Yala didn't even die. And she was so annoyed about that. It cracked me up. And Shera's like, you know what? I don't know if this is going to work. But I have this fucking weapon. And I have a artifact here of like great power that is losing that power. And it's sort of loose. Maybe I can do something. And she stabs her weapon into the box and uses her sort of abilities to inhale in a way that sucks the mist into the weapon. And then she goes over to Darius and says, awaken this. And he's like, what? And she's just like, awaken it. It might bring the veil back. Just do it. And he's like, holy shit. I can't. No. There is so many bad ideas in that. No. And basically, she's like, I left a woman alive that I hate because you made me. You can thank me for her life by fucking doing this. And I just love this. She winds up like shoving him out of the way to attack somebody who turns out to be Maya. And eventually sort of just leaves him with the weapon. And he finds her later and is like, okay, I did it. But it is, for a moment, just him going, what are you talking about? And I found this really funny. So anyway, Maya says, Calder's after you personally, and he's coming now that the veil has lifted. Shera didn't bother asking any questions. She scooped up Siphon, impaled on the Black Watch spike, and then hobbled into the woods. With Maya's support, she ran. So then we go to 22, and this is the moment where we find out about Yala's like connection with Maxius and Maxwell. I keep saying Maxius. His name is Rudius Maxwell, and I'm like putting his names together. He says the empire is weakening. Only the guilds are strong, and our dedication to a failing empire is corrupting even us. The consultants are rotting from the inside, and the emperor is not what he was. And essentially, he is here because he is supposed to be being executed. He had refused a mission, actually killing those who were not registered as his targets. So he in trouble. But the reasons behind why he did it, those are what compel Yala. And she's like, so let me get some opinions out of you, just out of curiosity. And she says, you're far too old to change your profession now. There are 12-year-olds in the garden who could slit your throat before breakfast and forget about it by lunch. At that, he did react. Let me train them then. I have military experience and guild training. I could create an army just for us, dedicated to the betterment of the world. Yala leaned back, studying him. To think he would propose exactly what she intended for him. Was it a coincidence, or had he anticipated her? We would erase you. All your rights as a member of this guild, your mission record, your financial accounts, everything. You would cease to become Rudius of the Masons and would become Rudius Maxwell in truth. And he realizes that she's like considering this and gets pretty excited. And it says this experiment would cost her practically nothing. If he succeeded and brought them a new generation of soldiers, the guild would be stronger. If he failed, there would be no way to prove his connection to the consultants. Even a reader wouldn't be able to dig it out after his blacks were burned and his cover thoroughly established. They might figure out he wasn't the blood son of the Maxwells, but that wouldn't be incriminating. Interbreeding and infidelity were facts of life among the Empire Heights. And finally, she's like, all right, unless you return successful, I expect to never hear your name again. And then we come back to present day, and Esther 6 flying over the island. She is realizing that some shit has gone very badly wrong and that the consultants have been whooped. And she looks around for Joran Cursebreaker and finds him like under a bunch of ash, kind of clawing his way out. And it's really funny because she's just standing there like, you, and she's laughing at him and he's very irritated about it. Let's see. Joran seized her ankle because she's about to go and like handle Calder Martin. She is over this guy. And he says, Baldassar Kern, the head of the Champions Guild. What about him? He joined Captain Martin, and not alone. He brought a few of his pack. Open combat has always been your special suit, so I defer to your expertise, but I would highly advise the quiet path. And she has to stop and be like, shit, I could handle a champion. I could even handle the guild head, but I can't handle the guild head and a bunch of them. Like, that's gonna be a problem. And this is when he says, is Lorelei chastising Alagaeus on the other side? And I don't remember if we heard about Lorelei. Is this a character that we saw, a regent that we saw an attempt on her life? I can't remember this one. But Esther just says, no, when I tracked her down, she'd already talked her assassin out of killing her and converted him to the unknown god. I hear he's a devout Luminian now. And he's just kind of like, God damn it, every time I think that she's going to die, she doesn't. And it's just getting annoying at this point. So, let's see. He grinned around his pipe. If my instincts can be trusted, the veil was not lost, merely misplaced. Good. And there's always the possibility my instincts are grubby little liars, and the consultants have given up the game entirely. If that's true, we may as well try to swim the Aeon overnight. And she says, no, I have a good feeling about this one. So then we go to Bastion's Shadow, where Shera and Maya are. And they have a little, like, conversation about Lucan's death and the fact that it wasn't Calder Martin who actually killed him. The navigators are, like, closing in on them at this point. And the description of the ships, there's the Testament, which is his, which we know of. The rust-colored ship with bright red sails. The golden lettering on the side said the Eternal. And then a white, long ship like hollowed-out bone with a flame-eyed skull on the front that grinned at her. Ladies and gentlemen of the Consultants Guild, you may notice that we have you surrounded. We're going to escort you back to the capital where... Surrounded! I love this. I can't remember the name of this little guy, but this is his pet who just, like, loves to repeat shit that's distressing. And Calder is really starting to get annoyed. And this was honestly really funny. But I can also understand how if you don't know what this little guy is, this would be incredibly upsetting to you as a person who is being, like, allegedly... He's been like, we won't kill you all. We are trying to have, a civilized, but then this guy is like, consume us all. Oh my God, this fucking kills me. Somehow the navigator captain had actually managed to get himself installed as emperor. How long would he last? As the ships loomed closer, the commotion on deck gradually made its way over. It was Darius breathing heavily inside his hood, voice excited. Shera, I actually did it! Don't ask me how, though. There's something strange about these knives. It's as though they were about to awaken on their own. I barely had to do anything. So, he has Siphrin. And it's transparent again, but instead of green, it's like blue-silver clouds rolling around inside. And she grabs the hilt and feels this awareness and manages to bring the veil back up, but it costs her an insane amount of energy and she almost passes out on the spot. And it's, as she puts it later, the tiredest that she has ever been in her life. And everybody is like, what the fuck is going on? And Yala shows up and is like, was that you? And Shera's like, yep. And she holds up the vessel and Yala kneels and calls her guild head because it makes sense. Shera has bonded to the fucking veil of the island. That making her guild head just makes sense. But it didn't occur to me, And I really wonder, like, can she leave the island and the veil still be up? How does that work? What kind of connection does that have? And I love as everybody kneels, Darius is just behind her saying, fascinating. And she just literally lays down and goes to sleep. And that is the most Shera response to being made Guildhead unexpectedly that I have ever seen. And my personal feeling on this is, as much as it sucks that Yala didn't die, taking away her power and becoming Guildhead is low-key the most baller move and better than killing her. So she kind of got what she wanted there, I have to say. So yeah, what a great ending. I love this moment so much. George is over in the chat. Sorry, George. Later when one turns into a turtle is great. Oh my God, I forgot about that one because it like sticks to Bliss's face. Oh, what I said is just, it goes between being really funny to truly hideous and grotesque, you know? George says, this whole series and Shera's character feels like a masterclass in writing about neurodivergent characters. Shera is so real and lovable and whole as a character, and to me clearly on the spectrum. We have not seen an attempt on Laura-Lee's life, but we know she is a regent and founder of Luminian Order. Shuffles! Thank you, George. I forgot he had such a silly name. Oh, that's so good. Shuffles. All right. Well, I'm over time here, so I really have to wrap up, but this was a great ending. Good for you, Shera. And I'm so glad that it's Bastion that she's like bound to now, and that whatever was going on with Cyphrin is not happening anymore. I mean, I don't know if it was good for her to have been bound to Cyphrin first, and if that taught her some like willpower in resisting, even though she didn't resist always as successfully. But Bastion feels like it's going to be, I hesitate to use the word, a more calming influence. I'm not sure how true that is, but it can't be as chaotic and terrifying as Cyphrin had been. I wouldn't think. Maybe I'm wrong about that too. Who knows? Anyway, next week, or no, what's today? Tuesday. So this week, Friday, I get to start of Dawn and Darkness, and I get to start to see things from Calder's perspective. So I'm very excited about that, because I really do want to know what the fuck he did with his wife after she murdered Lucan, because that was some bullshit. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you again, George, so much for commissioning this. It's been really fun. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.